Well, hello. My name is Kevin Pulver. Most of you don't know me. I'm of no consequence. But I saw a video the other night. A missionary named Brandon Watson had put a video up about a missionary that he worked with for 22 or 23 years named David Hogan. And I thought, you know what? I had an experience with David Hogan pretty near 35 years ago, and I ought to put my experience up there too. And then just today, I saw that Mike Winger had put a post up on Facebook about David Hogan. And I said, I'm going to try to do this. This is new for me, but I want to share my experience. I first heard of David Hogan in the late 80s. He came to our church in Lincoln, Nebraska and preached to us. Pastor Mike Wooten at the old Victory Fellowship. And the appeal, some of you might be wondering, what was the appeal of this David Hogan? Well, the thing is, he sounded a little bit like Indiana Jones. He had all these wild stories. He had big diesel 4x4 pickups and off-road motorcycles, and he'd be hiking, getting into these remote villages and beautiful mountain locations, that they'd hike to and try to get out here and evangelize these Indians. And he had stories of conflict and persecution, adventure, and stories of miraculous signs and wonders. And in a time in the late 80s when it seemed like ecumenicism was on the rise, David Hogan would be calling out the Roman Catholic Church. He would say things like, a lot of the persecution we get down in Mexico is from the Roman Catholic Church. And then he would say, the Catholic Church is a devil. If that offends you, you got a different God than I do. And me, as having come from a Roman Catholic background, that really appealed to me. I was pretty zealous that, hey, I disagree with a lot of the things the Catholic Church says, and it seemed like all the evangelical church was wanting to just get along and downplay their little differences, and they're really not little differences. They were willing to burn Protestants at the stake for those, and the Protestants were willing to die. And so it's not semantics. There's important differences. But when the church as a whole was kind of downplaying that and just trying to get along, David Hogan was pushing back, and that appealed to me, and all the the wild stories and stuff. And this wasn't what we would refer to maybe as missionary tourism, where he would get these, what he would refer to as sissy Americans down here in Mexico and coddle them and cater to their every whim. No, he would say things like, you're going to eat what's set before you, and you're not going to offend my Indians. He said it took years for him to build a relationship, and he wasn't going to let some selfish, ungrateful American ruin his relationship. And we were all about that. We thought, yeah, that's great. And so we made plans that we were going to go down there. And I don't remember the exact time. It was before we were married. I don't know if it was 89, 90, 91, somewhere in there. I went down. Pastor Mike Wooten, Todd Morley, who's here on Facebook, and Pat Klein, who's a missionary with Vision Beyond Borders out of Wyoming. So it was all of us. Maybe there were more. I can't remember. Anyway, we drove from Nebraska down to, was it Raymondville? Clear down on the tip of Texas, and met Brother Philip Gamble, who was a missionary. We'd had him come to Lincoln, the church, and visit, so we knew him. We met him, and when he got there, the first thing he said was, look, Brother David told me that he left me a message, says he needs to get a hold of me. It's important. So he said, I don't want to leave yet. He was going to drive us, because it was like an 8-hour drive from the border station down into Valles, Tempoal, down in there somewhere where he was living, Hogan. And Philip said, he left me a message that he's got to get a hold of me. I got to get a hold of him. It's important. And he said, I don't know what's going on. Maybe maybe something's happened. He doesn't want you to come down. And so we stayed there for hours trying to, get a hold of David Hogan on the phone. Couldn't get a hold of him. Of course, this was the days before cell phones and everything. And Philip says, well, let's just go. And we drove, and the roads were terrible and long drive. Finally get there to Hogan's house, and I'll never forget, he come out, and he acted like he was just angry when we were there right from the get-go. He says, Philip, where you been? And he said, well, you left a message that I was supposed to get a hold of you, and I couldn't get a hold of you, so we were waiting around trying to get a hold of you. Didn't know if there was something you needed or, some kind of trouble where we shouldn't come. And he said, don't you know I can get a hold of you if I need to? And it was just nasty. And anyway, we went in the house, and one of the first things he did, I'll never forget, he was sitting in a big wooden rocking chair, and he's got on overalls with no shirt and no shoes, and he's rocking in this rocking chair like he's very manic, and he said, Debbie, get me some ice water. And Miss Debbie brings him this big glass of ice water, and he sets it down beside his chair, and he said, ice is scarce around here. That's why it's all mine. And then he did not touch that water. We just sat there and watched the condensate beat up on it and run down onto his tile floor. And in the morning, there was a big ring of water and a melted glass of ice water. He didn't even touch it. And he sure enough wasn't going to offer us any, because ice is scarce around there. That's why it's all his. So then we had supper, and he's asking us all. Now, some of them had planned to stay a week or so, and then I was planning to stay like a month or something, I think. He said, Brother Mike, you're going to stay a week? Yeah. And he looks at me and he says, you're going to stay longer? I said, yes, sir. And he just got this look like a challenge, and he said, we'll see. As if, he's taking a personal challenge to drive you out of there. It was really kind of weird. We just got there, and it's almost like some kind of fraternity hazing or something. So he acts like he's mad, and I go to the room where we were staying, and I'm just weeping. Here's a guy that we looked up to. We were excited. We'd planned to come see him, and he's just like this jerk. I mean, just like a total butt. And I'm in here weeping and talking to God about it. And the thought came to me, the fruits of the Spirit, love and joy and gentleness and these kind of things, long-suffering, are every bit as important, every bit a manifestation of the Spirit as the gifts, miracles, things like that of the Spirit. And he wasn't showing us any of that. So anyway, we took off the next day. He's going to go and show us some of the works out in there, the remote villages. And the first thing we did, we get into a village way up in the mountains. Of course, it's a beautiful drive and treacherous roads, and it's kind of exciting. But we get to the village, and here's a young man. I don't know if he's 15, 16, 17 years old. I don't know if he was demon possessed or if he was just really severely, mentally ill. I don't know. But the boy looked like he could have been demon possessed. And the first thing Hogan said, there he is, you all bunch of sissy Americans always bragging about casting out devils and everything. Here's your chance. Why don't you go do it? Why don't you cast out the devil? And of course, we just sat there, and I remember thinking, what about you, Mr. Big Shot missionary with all your stories? Here's your chance. You talk about our chance to cast out the devil. You're the one with all the stories. Why don't you go cast out the devil? Why don't you verify some of these things you've been telling us? But he didn't approach that kid, didn't pray for him, didn't do nothing. And we never saw any miracles. We heard a lot of talk. We saw a lot of challenges. We heard a lot of sissy American, that kind of talk. But like Pastor Mike said one time, it's us sissy Americans that are supporting him down there. I remember our little church, Victory Fellowship, there wasn't many people there, and they gave him $1,000 that time he came. I remember that. I remember being impressed in the late 80s. That's a lot of money. But We go another night. He took us somewhere and we're hiking. I remember it was up like through the rainforest, jungle, soaking wet, pouring rain on us. And of course, I understand the logistics. You don't know if the people you're supposed to meet are going to be there and stuff. But I just wonder if he did this just, as some kind of a little challenge to us. We hiked to where we're supposed to have a little service. End up didn't have any service. But the people let us stay in a hog pen. And when I say a hog pen, I mean a little room, maybe 15 feet square. I don't know, 15 by 15, maybe a little bigger. Thatched roof, a bunch of hogs in there. And we're soaking wet. And David says, well, this is where we're going to spend the night. And he instructed us all to strip off down to our underwear. And we had 2 sheets. We laid one sheet down, and then all of us laid side by side like pigs in a blanket, I guess you'd say. And then we had one sheet on top of us. And he said, now you guys are going to know what it means waiting for the morning. And boy, did we wait for the morning. And cold and wet and miserable. When we got up in the morning, we caught a bus, went somewhere else. And another night we're hiking somewhere, and he's telling us all kind of stories. Here's where they had a lot of persecution, and here, the Catholics were after him. And we can't keep up with him. It's dark, and we don't know the trail. And finally he comes back, and he's mad again. It ain't God for us to get separated out here. I said, you're telling me. But a lot of weird noises in the jungle we'd never heard. It sounded like a woman screaming, some kind of like an Aztec death whistle or something. I said, what's that sound? And he had to come up, get his nose almost right touching mine. Maybe it was touching. I don't remember. It was very close. I said, what is that? And he goes, rana, which I found out later that means frog in Spanish, rana. Anyway, it seemed like everything was a challenge to him. It was like some kind of, just like a hazing party. They've got claims of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that have been raised from the dead in his ministry down there. But I heard from one of the missionaries that used to work with him that, well, if somebody's, just mostly dead, as they say on The Princess Bride, then they count that as a resurrection. Well, there's a difference between almost dead, mostly dead, and really dead. And, if you were having hundreds and hundreds of resurrections, do you think that's something that this world couldn't get a hold of and couldn't see? I mean, I don't believe him. I think he's a liar. I think he's a narcissist. Now, he may mean well. He may care about those people. He may want to preach the gospel and see people saved. But the missionaries that I have talked to that were down there with him, they said he's not really preaching the gospel of Christ. He's preaching his little egocentric message, building his little kingdom. So he might be a sincere man, I don't know, but he just seems like an arrogant, mean jerk to me. Now, in fairness to him, the last time I did see him was approximately 1995 when my wife and I were at language school in McAllen, Texas. And we'd heard that he was going to be at a little church there speaking somewhere nearby McAllen. So we went over to see him, and he spotted me in there afterwards, and he came over and hugged me and said, I love you, man, which really shocked me. And I don't know why he did that. I don't know if he struggles with being a real human being and he has to try to show a little grace to people. I don't know. I don't know if that's part of his narcissistic playbook where he found out I'm in language school now, and maybe if he's nice to me for a bit, he'll get me down there so he can abuse me a little more. I don't know. But Brother Pat Klein, the missionary that was there with us, he saw right through it. He said, man, I'm getting out of here. I'm getting the first bus. I'm going to get out of here. And we kind of talked him into staying a few more days. And anyway, we all ended up leaving early and leaving together. We'd kind of had enough. But at that point, we really weren't, most of us, willing to call a spade and say, man, this guy is a jerk. He come up here with all these stories, and then he gets us down here and treats us, like we're subhuman. Anyhow, I've got a few more stories, but that's the most of it. God bless you all, and please listen to what Mike Winger's saying, exposing these kind of people, because that's true biblical love, is to care for the sheep and to expose the wolves. Amen.